Thank you, Enid, and welcome everyone. It's so nice to see everyone here today, and I hope that you are ready for the opportunity to look into the future. So what we're going to be doing today is we are going to be doing an ideation session. We all know that a lot has happened in the last 18 months that has impacted our world in ways we probably never, ever could have imagined. There are so many forces of change. And I think this image to me just kind of evokes what my world has felt like for so much of the last 18 months. There's so many things that are changing all at once that it's really hard to keep up with, and it's really stressful for everyone. This disruption that has gone on is something that is happening and is continuing to happen. We're starting to become experts at disruption and looking at the ways in which disruption is really impacting all of the things that we know and do, both in our work and in our family lives, in all aspects of our lives. So we are becoming experts at disruption. And one of the things I want to mention is just some of the driving forces that are the kinds of things we need to be thinking about as employers, and as in particular for those of you who, and so many of you said you have worksite well-being programs, and you are really in the position of being able to influence what goes on in your workplace. But some of the elements that are influencing what is going on in the workplace today is something called the demographic drought. We are approaching a sansdemic. The approaching sansdemic is transforming the labor market. And you may never have heard of the word sansdemic before. It means without. So sans is without, and people, demic is people. And you think about, what does that mean? How can we run our businesses without people? Well, that's exactly the problem, is we can't run our businesses without people. No matter what business you are in, your business doesn't run without people. So what we need to be thinking about in this perspective is, what are the impacts, and how is this influencing the way that you have to manage your work, the way you have to manage your organizations, and how you have to think about, can you achieve your business objectives without your people? You can't. So if there's simply not enough people to manage and grow your companies, what do we do? So here are a couple of these demographic trends that are influencing or creating this sansdemic situation. The first is the workforce of the past, and that is the mass exodus of baby boomers. The last 18 months has forced many people to think about, for a variety of reasons, whether continuing to work is right for them. The baby boomers are that large body of people that have been part of our workforce for many decades, and now they're approaching or have already approached retirement age. And the question really becomes, do they want to stay in the workforce? Some people have decided that this just is not going to be the kind of thing that they want to keep doing, and they are exiting the workforce. The second element is the workforce of the present, and that is that we are at a record low, the labor force participation rate. So that is kind of an economic statistic. The labor force participation rate of prime Americans is at a record low. Now, many employers have said, well, let's wait and see what happens in September when the pandemic funding that was provided for assistance and unemployment assistance has expired last week, and whether that's going to influence people going back to work. But we hear everywhere in this country about shortages in the workforce. And then the third piece is the workforce of the future. We are currently experiencing some of the lowest birth rates in US history. And the impact of that is that there, again, may not be enough people to fill the jobs that you may have, especially if you're in a growing or a trending business. So the result of this is that it becomes even more important for the people that you have. And if you're fortunate enough to have people who are of long service, this becomes especially important, is we have to really show people that we value them, that we care for them. And we can do that by using wellness and well-being programs. So you'll notice that I use well-being as the terminology because I feel that well-being is a more all-encompassing term. When we think about wellness, we think about our physical self. But when we think about well-being, it's a broader element. And it encompasses other aspects of who we are beyond just our physical health. And I like to use the well-being terminology. So much of what has gone on in the last 18 months is driving something called the Great Resignation. Let's face it, all those people who didn't have to get in their car and drive to work or get on public transportation to get to their employment and have been working from home have tasted something that they may have felt like, this is pretty darn good, and I think I might want to keep doing this. We're seeing job turnover really increasing significantly right now, and this is going to continue into the next year. So the ability to be able to attract, engage, and retain your employees is going to become even more important. Let's go that way and look ahead. Let's look ahead, because this is part of what your role is we need to be looking to the future. What in the future do we have to be prepared for so that we know how we are going to be able to support the business and achieve the business goals that we need to? I love this quote from Jack Welch. You may remember that Jack Welch was the CEO and then chairman of the General Electric Company for decades. And Jack said, a leader's job is to look into the future and see the organization not as it is, but as it should be. And I think that's an important thing for us to keep in mind in our roles in the work you do with well-being in your workplace. No matter what size your organization, you can help influence what the future of your organization looks like. And today we're going to discuss some ways that you can do that. But first, we're going to look into the crystal ball. We are going to be the futurists, thinking about what does it take and what can we bring into our workplaces that are going to impact the health and well-being of our employees. So polish your crystal ball. This is where we're going. So today's session is what we call an ideation session. So in the chat, I'd like to just have you tell me how many of you have participated in an ideation session before and know what an ideation session is. So if you say yes, go ahead if you've done this before. If not, just say, nope, this one's new. So let's just see in the chat, what have you, let's see, nope, okay, we've got a lot of no's, we've got a few yeses. All right, so it looks like we've got a mix, but I think we're trending towards no. Well, that's good. So I'm delighted to be the one to be able to introduce you to this experience and be able to show you what an ideation session is all about. So here's what ideation session is all about. This is an opportunity for you to collect information. So this is how we can ask the right questions and be able to create innovatively with a strong focus on your users, their needs, and your insights about them. So I was just having a conversation this morning with a CEO of a small community health center in Maine. And she was telling me that her employees, anybody who's working in healthcare these days, as you know, and some of you may be in the healthcare industry, you know how hard it is. And there's stress, anxiety, there's, how do we be resilient? How do we avoid burnout? And we were talking about the need to really understand what is going on with your employees. So collecting data is an important part of the work that we do. But we have to sometimes step beyond the obvious solutions and be able to look at innovatively at what potential exists. I know I can't think of all the best ideas. I might not be in the right role or might not see what's going on for everyone. The best way to find out is to ask the people who are involved. So what this does is it brings together perspectives and gives everybody a voice. And this is one of the things I really love about ideation sessions is everyone has a voice and you get to leverage the strengths of your team members. So we're going to help uncover some unexpected areas of innovation. We're going to be able to get lots of information in a very short period of time. And we're going to get some obvious solutions, but we're also going to get some creative solutions. And we're going to talk about how we're going to do this. We're going to have both content and a process that I want you to be aware of. So when we think about what is available for us, let me tell you a little bit about how this will help you and how we're going to do it. So there's some context setting. I am going to be spending the next few minutes getting some context set for you so that you can be thinking about this. We'll have some handouts that you can use to prime your thoughts. And then we're going to ask you to really come up with the ideas. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to be having you grab your cell phone and you're going to use it as your data input tool so that you can actually tell us what your thoughts are. We're going to do this in a series of breakout rooms, and I'll go through all the details of how we're going to do that later. And then we're going to come up with 3 top ideas. We're going to have a series of breakout rooms and different topics. And then we're going to come back with a series of suggestions and ideas. And then we're going to pick one and we're going to vote on one topic that is going to be key to the workplace of the future. But first, let's do a little context setting with the idea of well-being and what does well-being mean in the workplace? So many of you indicated that you have many programs that you are already doing and you're in businesses of varying sizes. Well-being can be an important element when you're doing it in a workplace, but it also can have many other influencing factors. Here's some things we know, and I don't know that many of you would argue with this statement. You can't achieve your business goals without an engaged and productive workforce. I think that just kind of says it, we need our people. We have to value our people. But we also know that employee well-being is at the core of creating an engaged and productive workforce. You need your people to be healthy. You need them to be engaged. You need to have them giving their best. That is when you will be able to achieve your business goals. So employee well-being, we want to be able to make sure that we make it necessary and urgent in every business in America. So these are the 4 thinking spaces that we are going to explore: technology, the built environment, culture, and employee experience. So let's dive into each one of these. We're going to take them individually. So this is a little context setting. So I want you to think, remember, you're the futurist. Think about technology in the context of how it's going to influence employee health and well-being. Now, there are a great many trends that exist within technology. And for some of us, we like to be early adopters. We like to, be the first to have something. And for others, we prefer to wait and let them work all the bugs out. Now, there are 4 areas I've highlighted here: artificial intelligence, robotics, big data, and the Internet of Things. These are all elements that exist in our worlds today. I think for many of us, we've seen, we've moved into these touchless societies that we are now existing in because of the pandemic. And while they're not truly robotics, we've seen many devices that have now become internet connected and so we don't have to touch anything. So we're seeing a lot of changes as a result. The Internet of Things is here to stay. Our lives we're probably all going to have smartphones, we all have smartphones. We're all probably going to have smart homes within a few years. Our buildings and our workplaces may get smarter with lots of different devices. And all of those may drive us to collecting more data. Big data is an important element to be thinking about in terms of where data is and how you can utilize it. So just as a factoid in this, there are expected to be more than 30.9 billion, that's billion Internet of Things connected devices by 2025. So 2025 is not very far off. And this whole concept of the Internet of Things and what's connected to it, how we are connected to the Internet, is essential to what is going to be continuing to happen in our worlds. And then I'd like you to think about all of the data that potentially can be collected within your organization. How can that data be used? I just attended last week the Society of Human Resource Management annual conference in Las Vegas, where I was a speaker. And one of the people I was speaking with there is from a company that has a variety of different types of sensor devices that can be used in the workplace. Well, their business took off at the beginning of the pandemic because these devices can predict things, can create data about things such as occupancy, how many people are in a space, or how frequently a space is being used based on where people are, and how frequently does it need to be cleaned or attended to. And there's all kinds of other ways in which data can be used. At Deloitte, they were utilizing during the pandemic the employee data that is generated. It's the latent data that exists within their IT systems. So for example, they could see when people were logging on Saturdays and Sundays and not taking breaks. So that could be information that would be shared with managers to encourage employees to make sure they're taking enough time off. And we don't want that to be big brotherish. It's not like we're watching when you're logging on. It's more out of the concern and compassion for the individual to make sure that they're not burning out. So we have to think about what is the information that we have available and how can we best be using it. But I also want to have a little caution here. Technology, it seems like there's always something new, different, better coming at us. So technology moves quickly. Individuals don't move quite as quickly. So we have this learning curve that is different when it comes to looking at individuals. And you can expect that organizations are not going to be able to move at the same pace as businesses. Businesses and organizations are not going to be able to move at the same pace as individuals. So we need to remember that the business is going to be, again, slower. And then finally, public policy is going to be even slower. So we have to remember that there are these different paces that need to be taken into consideration, especially with regard to technology. So let's talk a little bit about the built environment. So I'm just curious, and you can respond in the chat with this. How many of you have not been back to the office? So just say where you're working, home or office, in the purpose for this purpose during the pandemic. Have you been mostly home or have you been mostly in the office? So it looks like we've got a good mix, but mostly home. Some of a lot of you are in the office. I'm surprised to see so many of you in the office. It's interesting. So where have you been mostly? I know many of you are probably already back in the office. You can see I'm in an office, but where are you in terms of, so some of you are mixing now as well. So the built environment is something that really has changed a bit for us in the way we think about this and the way we have to consider some of the things. We used to think about, where our teams were in their physical spaces. What kind of amenities were we going to offer if we did offer those? How do we give employees the opportunity to be able to boost their energy as a result of what's done in the physical workspace? And then how do we collaborate? Where does collaboration come into play with the way that the workspace is organized? So when we think about what we've seen, and many of you are in the office, some of you are doing a mixed work at home and work in the office. This concept, and this may be new terminology for you, but it's something that's been around for a while. It's called location agnostic work. And it's becoming much more widely accepted. People, and this is part of what's driving the Great Resignation, is people are realizing that they really do want to just be able to work from anywhere. They want to be in the beautiful Black Hills and be able to not have to drive to an office. They don't want to have to commute anymore. So location agnostic work is really a business trend that is here to stay. So how do we have to think about that in terms of what we're going to be doing from the need for and the way business space is allocated? And the other thing to think about is whether or not many of you may have gone to, but maybe not have, is the pandemic the final straw for the open office plan concept? All those open tables and all that open space that was made available, are we now going back to spaces where there are dividers, or where there are more cubicles or conference rooms? How do we think about the space? There are a lot of trends that are going on in terms of the built environment. Even the sensor devices that I mentioned to you in terms of looking at quality of air, air temperature, looking at light and light quality. Do we have enough access to natural light in the spaces that we're in? These are going to be very important issues. If you're in a larger organization, you probably have folks that are facilities management teams, and they are the people that are thinking about this. Don't forget to partner with them as part of your well-being program. Now let's think a little bit about culture. So culture is an important aspect of every organization. Every organization has a culture. So how does that culture work in service of the values that you espouse in your organization? Does it feel like it's a great place to work? Do employees stay for long periods of time? Do you have long service teams? I worked with a manufacturing company for many years. We did their wellness and well-being programs for about 6 years. And I'd never seen an organization with so many long service employees. They just loved working there, and they were committed to the work of the organization. How do your leaders show up? Are they role models for the people in your organization? Are they really the kind of folks that are setting an example? Are they the ones that are texting and emailing while they're on vacation? Or are they dedicated to their family and they're taking that break? Role modeling by leaders is such an important aspect of what happens within the culture of an organization. What are the ways in which you celebrate in your organization? Do you and your teams have particular rituals or practices that you do? Whether that's, we got through a great month, or we had no safety issues, or whatever it might be. How do you celebrate? And celebration is important to be able to make people feel that they're valued and cared for. And where's the fun? Where's the social aspect? One of the CEOs I interviewed when I was writing my book was with a pharmaceutical company in Maryland. They've actually been involved in the vaccine trials. And they had, the time I interviewed the CEO, there were only about 400 employees in the company. But every Friday they would take about, quarter of their team, or, some number of their team, and they would go bowling. It was a ritual within the company that every Friday they would go bowling. And it was an opportunity just to relax and kick back, and for people to really be able to just get to know each other on an individual social basis. So think about the ways in which your organization is doing that. And so I talked a little bit about the way that our leaders are serving as role models. what behaviors are our leaders demonstrating, and are they demonstrating the behaviors that we want our employees to adopt? Because what you see in the leadership is what employees will look to be able to understand, well, that's a role model and that's how I should be acting. And then we have to also remember that in everything that's gone on, especially for people who are working at home, we have to remember that employees may be feeling isolated and disconnected. This is where, from a cultural perspective, we need to think about how are we focusing on helping people feel they belong, making sure that they know that they're cared for, but also to have people reach out to them on a level that offers compassion and empathy, so that we make sure people do feel like they really are cared for. Now let's talk a little bit about employee experience. This is our third thinking space. From the employee experience perspective, what we really want to be thinking about is that, remember that employee experience goes from the very first moment you start to interact with, from a recruiting perspective, when you interact with that organization, until well after you leave that organization. Everything that touches an employee is part of that employee experience. I can remember another one of the CEOs that I interviewed for my book talked about how he was an advertising agency, or PR agency, sorry. And they had a lot of young people that they hired, but their technology was really old. Like they were embarrassed to show up at a client meeting and put their laptop on the table because their technology was so old. That's their digital experience. That's part of employee experience. What's it like? So when we think about how well-being drives employee experience, there's a relationship here. Well-being drives improvements in workforce experience more than any other business outcome. So I really love this information from the Deloitte Global Human Capital Trends Survey. This is an annual survey. If you don't follow the Deloitte Human Capital Trends, I would encourage you to put this on your reading list. This is looking at what is most impacted by your well-being strategy. And you see that workforce experience, more than anything else, customer experience, financial outcomes, that workforce experience is really impacted by the work you do with your well-being strategy. And when we think about the elements of employee experience, these are some of the pieces that I think are really important for us to be looking at: inclusion, connection, flexibility, and recognition. So you may or may not in your role be involved with the elements of inclusion, diversity initiatives within your workplace. But when we're doing well-being programs, it's really important for us to be thinking about, are we inclusive? Are we leaving anyone out by the way we create and implement our programs? There's nothing more important today than creating a workplace that is inclusive for everyone. The way we connect with people, and for those of you that have been working mostly at home, you certainly recognize this. How is connection created, and how is connection really nurtured? If we're feeling that the isolation or that disconnection, we're not going to feel like we belong. And when we don't feel like we belong, we're not going to be engaged. So connection and the ways in which people are connecting is really important. We talked a little bit about this concept of location agnostic work. To what extent do you offer flexibility to your team in the way that when and how they work? Now, I get that in a lot of businesses, it's just not possible. The nurse that has to show up in the workplace, in the facility, in the hospital, wherever it is, there's not a lot of flexibility. Somebody approached me last week at the SHRM conference and said, how do we do this? How do we do flexibility for educators? Educators need to be in the classroom. How do we support them with flexibility? And my answer to her was, you need to ask the educators. And then finally, recognition. Recognition is such an important element in employee experience for really helping people feel like they are valued. They are the people that really are making this business successful. What kinds of rituals and practices do you have? So recognition and celebration go together. So we need to be thinking about what are those pieces that we are going to be able to really help show people that you care and that you're recognizing them and rewarding them for the work they're doing. So those companies that are investing in diversity, equity, and inclusion are 8 times stronger in employee retention. So these are important elements to be able to use some of this kind of data to be able to convince your leaders and to demonstrate to your leaders why they really need to be making investments in these types of programs. So these are our 4 thinking spaces: technology, the built environment, culture, and employee experience. So I'd like to stop at this point and let's just see if we have any questions. So remember that we're going to be thinking about the future in the context of these 4 thinking spaces. And if you have any questions, let's go ahead and just have you type them in the chat right now about any one of these 4 thinking spaces that we've just talked about. So let's see what you've got there, what you've got for questions in the chat. All right, let's see what we've got here. No questions? Because this is going to be the basis for which we are going to be then moving into our breakout rooms and for our ability to be able to really be able to get into some good conversations that you're going to be having with each other. One of the things I see most often happening around these issues is prioritizing them. So which do we focus on first? Do we deal with technology issues? Do we deal with the physical workspace? Do we look at the culture and see if our culture needs to, is something not working from a cultural perspective? And all of this will be driven by data. And we're going to talk in a moment when I tell you a little bit about how we're doing this, the process we're doing this. You'll see how this works. But prioritizing, what do we focus on first? And I'm just curious, what kinds of changes, you can use the chat for this, what kind of changes have you made in the last 18 months in your workplace? I mean, the obvious one is people were working from home, but what other kinds of big changes have you made in your workplace in the last 18 months as a result of the pandemic or as a result of the need to be able to keep up with your interests of your workforce? Tell me about the changes. Let's just see in the chat, what changes have you made in your workplace? Nobody made any changes. All right, here we go. So education for staff, put a priority on our staff's mental health. Thank you. Yes, so many people are doing this now. Why is it so important? Because mental health is such a big issue for us. We have shared in staff, bring in meals to share. So that's more of the social, that can be a wonderful social element. Can also be a great way to get to know people in terms of understanding how they're great cooks or whatever they may be, their ethnic origins and the way that they prepare meals. The use of technology to create social connections. So great idea there. Of course, we need to be making connections, and technology is an essential way these days for us to be able to do that. The board of directors provided individual personalized notes and a small gift of appreciation. Love that. Thank you, Darcy, for sharing that. That is so great to be able to have that personal touch. That's a demonstration of the ways in which we are caring for our people. And then the work from home in healthcare. In healthcare, that can be very hard. So in working from home in a healthcare environment, for many, that's very new. I work with a number of healthcare organizations and did a lot of work in the first 6 months of the pandemic with hospital well-being managers from around the country. And we convened on a weekly basis for 6 months. And it was really interesting to hear the extent to which they were obviously dealing with mental health issues. This was in the early part of the pandemic. Many issues around healthcare, mental health. But it was also really interesting in one fairly large hospital system, nobody worked from home. And the reason was that there were no laptops. Everybody had desktop technology. And so they couldn't work from home. So it was really interesting how they had to adapt. And then over time, they were able to make changes in their technology. So we provide resources and programs. Whoops, I just lost that one. Where'd it go? Resources and programs that were adapted to those being at home. Of course, we have to do that, especially with your well-being programs. Pull together a slideshow of employees with them in action. Again, that's celebration, right? That's celebrating the people. Shared a bagel and muffin appreciation morning. Little things do go a long way. The use of technologies for virtual meetings, in person, rounding on our employees, adapting to normal healthcare practices, shifting on a daily basis throughout the pandemic. And the hard part is that so much has been changing so fast. Just when we think, I've coined a new term here called the new normal, and it's really the normal for now, right? Normal for now, maybe today, what it is for today, maybe is for what it is this week, maybe it is for who knows how long, but it's normal for now. We have to be ready and resilient to be able to make changes quickly. Better flexibility and understanding of work-life balance. Great concept there, because it's changed. The hard part is everybody thought, well, I'm working from home, so now I have more time to exercise. I can go to the Y, I can, walk the dog more. And the reality for many people was they were so tethered to their computers that they were actually working more. So productivity increased. That was a good thing, but now people are getting burnt out. So we have to remember that there's these cause and effect relationships. Is we've got to be watching all of these different things so that we make sure people are taking their time. There's this something called the fake commute. Have you heard about a fake commute? Well, people used to have the commute. It was the break between work and home. So you had this time to leave one behind and leave that role behind and be ready for your next role. Well, for many people that, they didn't even have an office door to close, so that they were now walking from one room to the next, going from the dining room to the kitchen, and now it's dinner time. So we didn't have that way to break up the day. So people are adopting fake commutes, go for a walk at 5 o'clock. That's your little commute. Go take the dog for the walk, to make that mental break between work and home. So all of these are some of the different things. So thank you for sharing all of those great thoughts of the changes you've made. Now we're going to start to think about, how do we look ahead? How do we look to the future and be able to really think about where we're headed? So let me tell you a little bit about how we're going to do this. So we've got a few minutes. I'm going to explain the how. So this is where I need your complete and undivided attention, because you are going to be responsible for doing this. We are here to support you through this. But when we come back from the lunch break that we're going to take in a few minutes, what we are going to do is, this is how we are going to design our ideas and collect our ideas for the workplace of the future. So we've talked about these 4 thinking spaces, and the technology, the culture, the employee experience, and the built environment. We are going to use breakout rooms to mimic the idea of our thinking spaces. If we were all together in a room, I did this last week in Las Vegas with over 100 people. We went to the different corners of the room and we created those as our temporary thinking spaces. We're going to do that here today, using technology to give us breakout rooms. And when you get into a breakout room, we're going to have a single topic, such as, so the first one is going to be technology. How can technology support employee health and well-being? And we're going to answer one question at a time. You will be with a variety of, with other people in your breakout room. You will talk through some of the ideas of how technology can support employee health and well-being. And then in these 4, we've talked about these 4 as our breakout rooms. Then what you are going to do is you are then going to, all of a sudden this decided to do something else. You're going to be assigned to a breakout room. You're going to brainstorm your ideas, and then you are going to use your phone. Now, this is something speakers don't often say, is pick up your phone. And we're going to give you a code, and you're going to go to Mentimeter. You can do this in another browser window, or if you have your phone handy. And we're going to give you a code to be able to record your ideas. Then as you are recording your ideas, it will be building a word cloud. We're going to spend 8 minutes in each thinking space. And then we're going to come back and we're going to see what your answers were. We're going to see what became most important for you in each thinking space. So we're going to do that 4 times. So we're going to do technology, we're going to do culture, we're going to do employee experience, and then we're going to do the built environment. And as we come back from each one, you're going to see what the content is that you are contributing. So I want you to think about this. I've been talking and giving you content, but this is a process, and I want you to observe the process of data collection. This is actually a way to collect qualitative data, and I use this kind of method all the time when I'm doing workplace well-being strategies with organizations. And what ends up happening is that we are collecting the voices, the opinions, the insights from your people. And we use that in a planning process. So you'll see as we go through this first round, after we take our break, that we are going to have information, data that is useful and that we can then use. So at this point, I'm going to, and then let me just tell you how we're going to wrap up our next session, is we're going to collect from those 4 breakout rooms, the top 3 ideas. Then we're going to come up with that list of 12, and then you will choose one as the way that you will pick what's most important in the workplace of the future. So with that, I am going to stop talking now. I'm going to turn it back to Enid. Let's see if we have any other questions before we head off to our short break. And Enid, I want to see if we've got any other questions that have popped up in the chat that we might want to answer at this time.
Any last minute questions before we go on break? We will return back here at 12:20. We'll start with a couple waterfall questions again, and we'll roll right into breaking out with and collaborating with other work sites. So we hope you come back. I don't see any popping in yet, Mari. So
all right, well then we'll just have a couple of minutes extra on our break. So enjoy your break, and we'll see you back here in about 24 minutes, I guess it is.
Yes, and be sure to put the slides that come up here